So surprise, surprise, got a phone call this week. Our driveline got finished. It's a two-part driveline. So we have the smaller front piece that's going to go from the transmission to the carrier bearing. And then the second shaft will go from the carrier bearing to the rear differential. So we're going to take it out. We're going to bolt this onto the transmission and the differential with the slip in place, and then we'll figure out where we need to mount the carrier bearing so we can get that installed. So let's get this up and start installing it. Okay, so we brought the driveline out. I'm going to install it here. A couple of things we have to know are some numbers. So get yourself an angle finder. This is a magnetic angle finder. I stuck it on the front crankshaft pulley as well as the rear of the drive transmission. They should be the same because it is one continuous shaft going through, and we are at a 2.80 degree down on our transmission. Then I came back to the differential, stuck it on the differential, and we are at a 2.8, and it tips up. Technically it's still a down angle because that's causing the oil to flow downwards into the pumpkin. So we're at 2.8 on each end, which is exactly where we want to be. We want to be approximately 3 degrees down on the transmission and 3 degrees up on the pinion. And at 2.8, we're about as close as we're going to get. So next thing we're going to do is assemble the driveline, install it to the pinion and the transmission, and then we have to set our carrier bearing angles in the middle. So let's get to work on that. First thing I want to do is they've taped the U-joints so the caps don't fall off in transport. So we're going to carefully remove the tape. We want to keep our caps in place. And for the transmission, we have, my camera's a little far away, but we've got a bracket, the bolt, it's going to bolt right into our yoke on the transmission. So that's going to be our first one. Let's set that up in place. It sets nice and pretty in there, and we'll bolt these on. On the yoke, there are little tabs that keep the cap on, and so when you're installing it, you need to make sure that you've pushed the caps on as far as they'll go and get them to drop in behind that tab. So I'm going to tighten those bolts up. I'm going to fast forward you while I do that, and then we'll move to the next part. All right, I'm not sure what happened there. My camera cut off while I was bolting the driveline to the transmission, but it's simply 4 7/16 bolts. You didn't really miss anything. So it's simply a matter of installing these 4 bolts. I'm going to show you this process while I have this camera angle open here. Our driveline is going to run down to a carrier bearing that we will build a bracket for. The 2x2 tubing here is so that I can try to keep that bracket below the frame rail. So that's just kind of a spacer there to let me know where I'm at. We're going to hook these 2 drive shafts together with the splines here. Then we'll run our driveline back to the rear pumpkin where we'll install this hardware. And once we have this hardware installed to the rear pumpkin and the driveline's mated together with this shaft, then we'll start to raise and lower the carrier bearing until we get the desired angle we want. So let me put the camera back down on the stand, get the rear differential bolted in, and then we'll come back and talk some more. Okay, so I slid the rear differential onto the shaft at the carrier bearing, and now we're going to install the rear differential and driveline. We're going to see if we can rotate it, and I can. Got some tape again to take off, keep our bearings from flying away when we're in the trunk. And we got our bolts that are going to go on. So here we go. You pull our drive shaft towards the differential. And then these bolts will go in beyond the caps. Looks like I got to actually start the bolts a little bit before I pull that driveline tight in there. All right, so now we'll get that driveline pulled up tight in there, push those through, and we'll put lock washers and nuts on these bolts. When I get that done, we'll start to figure out the pinion angle in setting the carrier bearing. So again, I'm going to speed this up while I put all these nuts on here. We'll see if the camera stays with us or whether it shuts off somewhere in the middle. Let's see if we can find a hole. Put that on here. All right, 9/16. Tighten these bad boys down. I did take the lock washers off because we're only assembling this to get the pinion angle. And when it's all said and done, we're actually going to pull this drive shaft back off because we don't even have axles in this rear differential. And we're going to send everything out to get painted and powder coated, all of that stuff anyway. So we don't need to use our lock washers. We're not driving down the road yet. And one more. There we go. That's the first part of our drive line. Now we have to figure out where to put the mount for the carrier bearing. I have ordered a piece of 2.5 inch or 3 inch channel iron, and we're going to run that across with a C cup down. Bearing will rest up inside of it, and that should protect the bearing below the cab and between the two frame rails. So let me reposition the camera and then we'll look at the bearing and how to set pinion angle and the works. Okay, we've got the rear differential bolted up. We've got the transmission bolted up. Now we have to figure out what we're going to do with our carrier bearing. As I explained, the carrier bearing is going to sit here between the frame. We'll center it between the two frame rails, and two bolt holes are going to be put into a bracket. It'll sit in this area, and then the carrier bearing is going to bolt up to that. What I've read is that we want to keep this front drive shaft as close to parallel with the engine as possible. I've also read that we should be off by 5 degrees so that the U-joints get a little bit of motion in them. We're 2.8 degrees down there, 2.8 degrees up here, and so we've got that factor. If you go to Spicer, and I'll put the exact website down in the description, because I'm missing something. It's not spicer.com, but you can go to Spicer's website. You can enter the angle, the down angle of your transmission. You enter the down angle, even though it's facing up. You enter the down angle of the differential. You indicate that you have a 2-part drive line, and it will give you the degree that you want to put this in at. So we may pull this right up to the bottom of this, and we may find that we have a 5-degree difference, which would be great. We want to be, at least if I'm reading and understanding correctly, we want to be within 5 degrees of our 2.8 on either end. So this one can come up a little bit, this one can go down a little bit, vice versa, as long as they're not perfectly straight and in line with each other. We have to have a little bit of pitch so that the U-joints get some lubrication. So I'm going to go enter those numbers in. I'll insert it here, and once we know that degree, I will know if I can mount my carrier bearing right to the bar at the height that I have it at, or whether I need to raise it, build a bracket that brings it up, or lower my bracket between the frame rails to lower the driveline. So let's get some numbers and figure out where we go from there. Well, the driveline is installed to the transmission, into the differential, and we have our carrier bearing. And I've done some thought and bounced some things around and changed my mind a couple of times on how I wanted to install it. I'm going to weld a tab right here on the frame on both sides, and then I have a piece of channel iron crossbar that's going to bolt to those so that I can remove it. And I'll drill the 2 holes, mount the carrier bearing on here. That'll support the drive line. It'll keep it all down below the pan of the cab. And so hopefully the next time we shoot a video, we'll actually have a cab sitting on here and talk about what we're going to do to modify the floor for that. Also working on some brackets for the fuel tank, so there'll be an update on that as well. But Monday morning, bright and early, I'm heading out to Las Vegas to the SEMA show, so I won't be doing anything on this project, but I will bring you some video from Las Vegas. So thanks for tuning in, and see you soon.